What's poppin', people? It's Dante. This morning I'm thinking about the Ricoh GR. Got the Ricoh GR shirt. Shout out to Samuel Lentaro for the invite to the Ricoh Rome event. Yeah, that was pretty cool. I just noticed they published the video on the Ricoh GR YouTube channel about a month ago. Yeah, I was just checking it out and reminiscing. Pretty good time. Yeah. And so, yeah, with that, let's talk Ricoh. Let's talk cameras. Camera equipment, I have very limited knowledge of. I'm not a big camera guy. Let's just get that out of the way. Shout out to Mary for the Christmas gift, by the way. Thank you. Check this out. Got cameras on my towels. I can wipe down the grease on my stove with the camera. And, but in all honesty, I'm not a big camera person. I started off using a Leica M3. God bless my great uncle Bill. He had a Leica M3 that he passed down to me, and I learned street photography. It wasn't until 2015 that I picked up the Ricoh GR2 and started to photograph more seriously, honestly. And it was the perfect camera early on for me as I was in school in Baltimore, and I was making photographs in a new community. And so here are some of the photographs I made in Baltimore. This was one of my earliest photographs that was successful in 2016 with the Ricoh GR2, photographing with the raw files, just processing the photos in Lightroom and exploring the streets. And so the thing I noticed early on with the Ricoh GR2 in my pocket was the fact that it was in my pocket, where I could walk around a neighborhood where I'm an outsider and not feel timid and not feel shy and not feel weird about my presence because I have a camera on my neck. And I believe that this idea of having a camera that fits in your front right pocket is maybe overlooked. I think we often imagine a photographer with a camera on the neck, but when a photographer has a camera in a pocket, this is where I believe there's more possibilities. And I'll talk about that more. Here I have the optical viewfinder attachment at the time, and I believe I lost this optical viewfinder at the scene because I was just so chaotic at this scene and just making so many photos. I think it fell off, and ever since this moment, I just stopped using it. As you can see in the shadow, I'm raising the camera to my eye, dropping to a low angle. And at this moment, actually, this is crazy. This is one of the earliest times I went out with intention as a photographer. I went out with the intention of making a photograph of this rainbow. So when I went out with my camera, it was raining a bit. I got my umbrella, I put the Ricoh GR2 in my pocket, and I walked around the same streets that I would typically walk around in Baltimore, making photos, waiting for the rain to stop. I approached this corner and I noticed the perfect scene unfolding, using the street to my advantage to give depth to the image, breaking the frame up with the building on the left-hand side, finding a subject to position in the foreground, which gives more sort of depth and dynamics to the frame, getting this sort of cherry on top with the lady in the back, looking through the reflection, the man in stride with the umbrella, and then of course the rainbow in the background. But when I tell you, I went out with the intention of making a rainbow. I still remember it like it was yesterday. There's some power to that. And so, yeah, I would walk around the streets with the Ricoh GR2 in my front right pocket, just sort of exploring endlessly and making snapshots and engaging with the community in Baltimore. And, I would find myself in situations that, honestly, I could only ever dream of. And I think that the power of the camera is that it becomes a passport, right? It becomes this excuse for you to go out there and engage with new communities, to engage with your neighborhood, to engage with your surroundings openly. And the fact that the camera sat in my pocket, it allowed me this access very easily and freely, because when you approach a new place and you have a camera dangling on your neck and you look like this obvious photographer, it can be startling, especially if you're trying to make more documentary photographs where you get to know a community and you become much more close to, the subject that you're photographing. You don't want to just bombard into a place with a camera on your neck. But if you can take the camera, like here I have the Ricoh GR3X, and just slip it in my pocket, well, then I'm now just a bystander. I'm now another pedestrian walking down the street. And I would engage with people casually and chat people up on the corner and visit the same locations time and time again and just become this sort of natural, integrated part of the community that wasn't necessarily out there just taking pictures, right? I was out there and I was curious about this community and I was engaging without the camera a lot of the times. You know, it was only after feeling comfortable in a certain scene or situation, after some time, that I would take the camera out and then begin, you know, snapping photos. And I think that the fact that you can go from being a photographer, having it on your neck or having it on your wrist, and then throwing it in your pocket and just being a normal guy, it's almost like a superpower, kind of like Spider-Man putting on his costume, right? And then going back to being Peter Parker again, right? That's something funny I just thought. That's actually hilarious. Yeah, it is kind of like that, right? And yeah, needless to say, the compact nature of the camera, I believe, is the most important feature of this camera. You know, for when I combine the Ricoh with a wrist strap, right? And I put the camera on my wrist and I have it in my hand where you can pretty much hardly even see I have a camera on me. This becomes the closest thing to not having a camera. You know, when I use the Ricoh GR3X and I'm on the streets, I half the time don't even remember, oh, I have a camera on me? Like, I'm just looking at life and it's this magic black box and I'm just, you know, snapshotting my way through the streets and it doesn't really, you know, get in the way, right? The point of a camera is to have the least resistance possible, right? Or you don't want any resistance between you and pressing the shutter. And so by simplifying the gear, you know, by removing a viewfinder, frankly, I can then make photographs with much more speed, you know, where even the simple gesture of raising the camera to your eye becomes a burden, in my opinion. You know, having the camera on your neck and dangling, it becomes cumbersome and clunky. And there's something special about taking the viewfinder off your camera, of using the LCD screen, you know, where you can make micro adjustments and movements with the camera that you can't necessarily achieve with other pieces of equipment. You know, when I use the Ricoh GR3X here, I'll hold the camera like this with my index finger on top and my middle finger on the shutter button, and sometimes shoot horizontal photos. I'll quickly make an adjustment with my wrist like this to do vertical photos. And I'm gonna be frank, a lot of the times I'm not looking through the viewfinder, I'm not looking through the screen, I'm just snapshotting and responding very fluidly. And there's something about that spontaneous nature of photographing this way that I can't help but to realize the power it has when it comes to making compositions in the streets. You know, when I look back at some of these early photos, there's something spontaneous about the frames and the way that I compose them. And I believe it has to do with the nature of the LCD screen. And so nowadays I'm using the high contrast black and white settings with a small JPEG file baked into the camera. And so these are some of the results I've been getting, where if you go and select small JPEG, high contrast black and white, and just crank all the contrast, all the shadows, all the black, white, highlight, whatever, just crank them all. You know, I have the grain all the way to the max, the clarity, like whatever the settings I have on my website somewhere, they're basically just all cranked to the maximum. And so these are some examples of the results that I get just straight out of the camera now with my new process. And these are just random selections. I've been photographing this way for the past 2 years, and these are early photos and experiments that I've made. And I can only imagine the stuff that I have. I just have to go through my archive, honestly. But these are just some random examples that I have to share in this video, just very briefly, so you have an idea of how I'm photographing these days. And, you know, I think there is something to be said about the process that I'm engaging. Oh, this is my first rainbow photo with the black and white simulation. I think it's pretty beautiful. Oh yeah, the snake. Yeah, the snake, and then now we're back here to Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia, this is where I'm at. And so, yeah, when I made this photo, I was able to drop extremely low, and looking through the LCD screen slightly allowed me to time that moment and really fill the frame. You know, with the viewfinder, it would almost be, honestly, like almost impossible to get that kind of photograph. That's a good example of that. But back to what I was discussing about this particular setup, using the small JPEG, using the high contrast black and white cranked to the max, is essentially allowing me to go back to day one. You know, where I've been photographing for a decade. You know, I've photographed a lot of different scenes all over the world in complex situations and conflict and war and, you know, situations like funerals and baptisms and villages, on mountains and markets. You know, I've photographed in a lot of different situations. You know, here's some of the thumbnail prints on my wall of just my photographs that I've made over the years. And I feel as though I now know a bit too much about photography, right? I think I know too much about how to make a perfect picture. And by embracing imperfection through the use of the contrast cranked to the max, returning to light and shadow, I'm basically going back to day one. Like, I'm basically going back to the root of the medium of light and shadow. You know, to me, going back to the basics, it's allowing me more creative freedom and thriving. You know, through limiting myself to the one camera, to the one lens. You know, the fact that the Ricoh doesn't allow you to, you know, change out the camera lens, right? This is another thing that's great about the camera. Not being able to change the lens, I think, would benefit a lot of photographers, because a lot of photographers, they love to flip-flop between lenses. And I can only speak from my personal experience, but I don't believe in that. I think that if you stick to one setup, you're going to thrive way more. And so by limiting yourself creatively and giving yourself these constraints, you know, and by pushing yourself using the high contrast and pushing to use a small JPEG, I mean, while it is extreme, come on, we're doing street photography. It's not like some serious like photojournalism or other kind of work. So we can experiment and play this way. And through that experimentation and play, I'm finding more joy in my photography. I'm the happiest photographer that I've ever been out of the 10 years of photographing now. You know, since returning to the Ricoh, since returning back to black and white, back to the basics where, you know, what I see is what I get. And, you know, there's no going back. I kind of just push myself to these extreme limits, and I can't see myself ever photographing in a different way from here, frankly. I mean, there's something about this process. I don't know how to really talk about it. But I can tell you that it brings a lot of joy in my life, where I'm pretty much just snapshotting my way through life. Having the camera in my pocket is allowing me to photograph in a variety of situations that I otherwise wouldn't have in the past, using a camera on a neck strap. You know, for instance, in the morning when I go to work and I make my commute, I always just carry the Ricoh in my pocket, and I can make photos out the window. When I'm at work, I can make portraits or candid photos of my coworkers and make photos during my lunch break and walk around the trail and use the macro mode and photograph closely at details in nature and make pictures that I used to not make, you know? There's something about just having the camera with you where it becomes an extension of your body that almost it feels like anything is possible, you know, where in the past I've limited myself in my approach and what I photograph, but now I feel like I'm opening up so many more possibilities. And I'm finding this through the process of constraining myself very strictly to using this particular JPEG setting and the Ricoh. And so, yeah, these are just some random thoughts about the Ricoh this morning. Once again, I'm not too big on gear. I can't really discuss the technical side of the gear other than the fact that I use the program mode or the aperture priority mode, and everything's automatic in the camera, and I just click a button. And that's, to me, what I love about this process is it really does become democratic. And I think that if anyone were to pick up a Ricoh and crank in these settings and go out in the world and just photograph their life where they are, no matter where you may be, you're always going to find something to uplift in a photograph and at least make it aesthetically beautiful. because the settings in the camera will give you this result that feels almost like a cheat code in street photography, right? It's like a cheat code by cranking the settings this way. Most things that you photograph will go from very mundane to extraordinary. And yeah, it's through removing the information in the shadows and crushing the blacks and focusing on the highlights, you know, by using the highlight weighting metering mode. And yeah, I'm very inspired by these paintings by Caravaggio and the use of chiaroscuro, the light and shadow. And yeah, I'm very much intrigued by light. I find that light ultimately is my medium as a photographer. And so going forward, recognizing this, I'm sticking to this process to emphasize the light in the moments that I photograph and to emphasize light itself as my medium. And yeah, honestly, the Ricoh GR just makes photography way more fun. It makes it 1,000 times easier. It's just more enjoyable. It brings me more joy in my life. I love just going for a walk and just having it in my pocket, just taking it out and snapshotting. And the great thing about these file sizes when you use the small file is I can store I have like hundreds of thousands of photos on my iPad right now. And honestly, when I have an iPad and I look through the photos like this and I have a small thumbnail, it's kind of, so you have like these little thumbnails, you know, it's just an easier way to like click and favorite and, you know, make selections. You can just click around and, you know, when you take the photo and you hold it up and you look at it, you know, it's really simple, right? You don't need Lightroom. You don't need to do any processing. You just get a nice photo out of the camera and you can hold this up and you really don't even need to print it. You know, I suggest publishing your photos on your own website. I use WordPress.org. I hosted my first name and last name on Bluehost.com, and I import all of my photos every single day, essentially, that I make pictures. I put them on the website. I back them up on Google Photos, so I just have a backup in the cloud, have them on my iPad, and yeah, from there I just move on to the next day, and I just continuously photograph and found a solution that really simplifies things to the very basics and just makes things easier. And the easier it is for me to go out and make pictures, the more fun I have and the more joy I feel. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about for me. I think that using the Ricoh will make you a happier photographer. If you want to choose joy, choose Ricoh. So those are just some thoughts. Yeah, so the only cameras I currently have, yeah, Ricoh GR3X, Ricoh GR3, and the GoPro Mini. Good setup.